Welcome to the Building the Cooperative Classroom podcast, the official podcast of the Johnson & Johnson Cooperative Learning Institute. Welcome to the Building the Cooperative Classroom podcast. This is Adam Rubichuk, and this is part 3 of our interview with David Johnson. So we pick up with David telling us a little bit more about those early days when he was in Muncie growing up and at Ball State University. And he talks a lot more about sort of the early days of his work with the civil rights movement and sort of his awakening into the prejudices of the situation in the area in which he grew up and his motivation to get involved and try to make a difference. So that's enough of me talking, and here is David.
Well, I have a question kind of related to your journey, right? From the beginning. When did you know? When was the aha moment? When did you know we've got something that really works?
There are many, not just one. One was when I read Alport, and I didn't know it then, but these five issues around reducing prejudice was first discussed by Goodman Watson in 1947, and then by a sociologist named Williams in 1947. And Alport just took sort of the general thought and pulled it together in his book, The Nature of Prejudice. He didn't invent it or create it. He just took the current knowledge base and went with it. But it took a while for me to find the roots and so forth. But once I saw those, especially the cooperation and the personal relationships, well, maybe you won't want to use this, but maybe I'll backtrack. And the way I got involved in the civil rights movement was I come from a very religious family. I had terrific parents, just incredible how lucky I was to have the parents I had. And about age 14, I decided that's it. I've had it with religion. But my parents would make me go to church every Sunday, regardless. And so to make them happy, I became president of the Baptist Student Union on Ball State campus. And it didn't mean I believed in any of it, or so forth, but that makes them happy. So why not? And as president, they took me to a national conference of all the presidents of Baptist student unions to talk about what student unions should be doing and so forth. And lo and behold, these kids from Greensboro, North Carolina showed up, and they were doing the original sit-ins, and they would talk about sitting at the counter and having food poured over their heads and so. And I was just a farm kid from Indiana. I didn't know any of this was going on, and I didn't know there was all this prejudice against blacks because I came from an all-white farm community where, families are distanced from each other and live miles away. And so I was stunned. And then I said, in my Indiana WASP sort of way, I said, I'm going to do something about this. And so I went back, and I had control of the student government, and I was the ex-editor of the student newspaper. So I had a lot of influence on the newspaper. So I thought, we're going to raise money and send it to Greensboro to help these kids with their sit-ins and so on. But then I thought, well, better check out my own backyard first before I start messing in other people's. So I went to the local head of the NAACP and said, is there any prejudice in Muncie? Which I'm sure he immediately thought I was crazy. But he said, "Who are you again?" And I explained, and he thinks for a while. I said, "No, there's no prejudice. You don't need to be concerned. There's no prejudice in Muncie." So I happened to be friends with the mayor's nephew. So I went to the mayor of Muncie, said, "Is there any prejudice in Muncie?" And again, the same reaction. He looks at me and he thinks, "Now, who are you again?" And then he said, "Nope, no prejudice in Muncie." So I went back and I had a job in a girls' dormitory scraping garbage. That they would bring their plates after they finish eating up to this window. I would take them and scrape the garbage. And with working with me was this black kid, same age, but different major, would scrape garbage. So I casually said to him, "I understand there's no prejudice in Muncie." And for a couple of seconds, I thought he was going to kill me. But gradually, I got him calmed down. I said, "Well, explain it to me. Explain it to me, because the head of the NAACP and the mayor says there's no prejudice." And so he took me around campus and showed me the situation, which at that point, the housing was fixed, that all off-campus housing for blacks was in the black neighborhood in Muncie, which was 4 miles away from campus. And it was dangerous enough that no female student could go home back to their housing after dark, which meant that during the winter, after they had to be back at their house about 5 o'clock, which meant no use of the library, no use of the swimming pool, no use of the facilities. They were all segregated off. And in restaurants, if a mixed group came in, black, white, etc., everybody got served, no problem. But if an all black group went in, they were told to leave and refuse service. So with his help, I pieced all this together and I changed it all. Well, I should say, we changed it all, because, but again, as I said, I had control of the student government. I had essentially controlled the student newspaper, and I knew all the key administrators. The president's son and I were good friends in high school, and so I knew. I'd been over to the president's house many times. I knew him and his wife. Gave me a power base from which to end it. But his explaining to me what the prejudice was and where it was and how it operated changed everything again. It was a key seminal moment. I owe him immensely. And it built the framework for me to be involved with SNCC in Mississippi, with the National Student Movement in New York City, with CORE, with all these other groups. And so it's an illustration of why these personal conversations between friends are so important. You never know. And another example, which will not maybe please Adam, but my mother was a church organist. And so at the First Baptist Church, she was the organist starting in 1940. This was 1961 or something. Been there 21 years. I might add that my family was thrown out of the church. My poor parents, they were thrown out of the church because of my work on civil rights. They went to my parents and said, "You have to stop your son from doing this." And they said no. And they just said, "You're out. You're no longer members of our church." Wasn't funny, but I'm laughing about it now. But she also was the organist at the Jewish temple every Friday night. And so many Friday nights, I sat up in the balcony with her and with Roger and I, and listening to the Jewish service and so forth. But I had no idea that there was a prejudice against Jews. And I had no idea that anything like the Holocaust had ever happened. I was just there, listening. It takes more than being in a place or listening to sermons or interacting with people. You got to have friends who tell you the truth about situations. And I have many black-white examples, but unfortunately not enough Jewish examples, because I was just a naive farm kid and thinking this is a nice service. And then Roger would blow the ram's horn because the rabbi couldn't do it. And Roger was a trumpet player and he could. So we were involved in things like that, but with no real understanding of the complexity of the situation. But with my black friend, David Miller, I would start things like saying, well, we have to decide who's next. And I'd say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and David would stop me and say, don't you dare continue saying that. And I'd say, why not? I've said it my whole life. My family has said it. Everybody in my community says it. And he says, you can't say it because it didn't used to be catch a feller by his toe. It was catch the N-word by his toe, and said, if you say that, you're promoting prejudice. And I'd say, geez, I didn't know. And most whites, I think, are in that situation, where they can say and do things with no conscious ill intent, but no one has told them not to, or explain the implications of what they're saying. And that's where these personal relationships and personal conversations come in again.
Here's a great place to pause, David. Next week, we'll learn more about those early days of cooperative learning trainings with teachers and what he foresees as the future of cooperative learning in schools. Until then, let's cooperate. Thank you for listening to the Building the Cooperative Classroom podcast, the official podcast of the Johnson & Johnson Cooperative Learning Institute. Please check out the show notes for all relevant links, including a link to our Twitter account and the Cooperative Learning Institute webpage. This podcast is copyrighted under the Creative Commons license, copyright 2021. Theme music courtesy of Jimmy Ryan.